One of my personal favorite culture shock experiences was actually seeing my Dutch girlfriend experience culture shock the first time she visited me in the United States of America. And while we can never recreate that initial culture shock ever again, at least for the USA, we can recreate that through other people. Bearing that in mind, in this video, we will be reacting to confused Europeans in the USA. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video.
Celebrating 13 years in the US today, so let me tell you about a culture shock I had when I first came here.
13 years? That's a long time. And honestly, just from hearing her talk, I don't know if maybe Finnish people are kind of like Dutch people in that they're really good at English, but I wouldn't have known she was from somewhere else. Even the way she looks, I feel like she kind of looks American. But I don't know, curious to hear what she has to say.
I moved to the US in 2011 as an exchange student here in Florida. I lived with an American family. You know, Floridians, Southern people, they're so nice and they talk to strangers, which is totally opposite of what we do in Finland. But my host dad and I, we went to Publix one day and, on the cashier goes, "Hello, how are you?" And I legit go, I'm like, "Good." And then once we walked out, I asked my host dad, why did the cashier care how my day was going? Because in Finland, you would never talk to strangers. Like if you talk to strangers, you're considered very weird.
So I can understand how, depending on where you're from, that could probably be pretty off-putting. At least the Finnish side of not talking to strangers or being discouraged from interacting with other people. As an introvert, that sounds like a dream. And that's one reason why I really want to visit pretty much any of the Scandinavian countries. It's because I've heard consistently that people keep to themselves and they mind their business. And that sounds incredibly appealing to me. And I kind of found that to be the case in the Netherlands as well, albeit not to the extent that I initially expected. People in the Netherlands were more apt to strike up a conversation with you. Granted, it happened rarely enough that when it did happen, it was pleasant. But it is kind of strange that in the US, the cashier will just ask you how your day is going or how your week is going or what plans you have over the weekend. It's like, I'd kind of like to keep that to myself. And then if you say that, you seem like the bad guy, but in reality, you're just setting boundaries. You're keeping your private life private, as it should be. When I was a cashier, when I worked at retail stores, I never, ever asked people how their day was going because I knew, and this is going to make me sound like a bad person, but I honestly don't care. I didn't really care how their day was going. I didn't really care. I was at work. I was there to work. I wasn't there to converse with people other than my coworkers. So I tried to keep those interactions as short as humanly possible. And I'm sure that other introverts like myself really, really appreciated it.
Honestly, if you go up to a stranger on the street, they're probably gonna think that you're trying to sell something to them or something sketchy is going on. If you go to a grocery store in Finland, you'll get hi. You'll get moi. That means hi in Finnish. They'll literally just scan your items. They'll say hi, and then they'll tell you how much your stuff is. That took me quite a while to get used to. Another occasion was...
I honestly feel like, again, in the Netherlands, you got more of those interactions, but in Spain, maybe because in Spain they don't really speak as much English. So once they noticed that I spoke English and not Spanish, they didn't even make the effort to try to talk to me, which makes sense. But I feel like at the grocery store specifically, they had no intention of interacting with you at all. And this is just my experience. Your experience might be completely different. But I felt like they were trying to get me out of there as quick as possible. They were scanning my items like this and putting them off to the side. And I was trying to keep up. There was really no room for a conversation in the midst of all of that. But again, that's one aspect of American culture that I really don't miss at all, because the conversations were not going to lead anywhere. I know a few friends, had a few coworkers who managed to get people's numbers like this, but other than that, I mean, if you're not actively trying to progress anywhere beyond that initial interaction, I feel like there's no utility value in doing it. I don't know if I sound like a sociopath right now or something. I promise I'm not. I don't really like talking to people.
In high school, there was this guy who like wanted to give me a hug, and I was like, he literally just like stood in front of me and went like this. And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, do they not hug people in Finland? And I'm like, not really. Like, we're really not touchy-feely, whatever. Like, you hug your partner. You don't really, I feel like you don't really hug your friends. At least, the way I grew up.
That's how it is for me too. Now, I don't want to go on a major tangent here, but I do feel like for men specifically, it's not very common to just hug your friend. And I feel like that applies in the US just as much as it does in Europe. Granted, a man might feel more compelled to hug his female friend more so than his male friend. But again, I don't want to go on a whole tangent about masculine intimacy and things of that nature. That's a whole different discussion for a whole different day. But I can see how that would kind of throw her off. Because especially for me, growing up, I was always the kind of person where I didn't want things to be ambiguous. I wanted the boundaries to be very, very clear. So if I had a female friend, if we did hug, I mean, we would keep the hug very short. I might give them a side hug or something like that. But I'm not a very touchy-feely person. Honestly, I might fit in very, very well in a place like Finland because everything she's talking about really resonates with me.
It wasn't like a huge thing. And don't, like my family, we don't really hug each other. If you go to Finland, don't talk to strangers. They're probably gonna think you're weird. And one thing is, if you get in an elevator, don't talk to people, because the joke is that, it's not really a joke, but Finns, they stare at their feet. They stand as far as possible from each other and they stare at their feet. And I will end this story with a quick little joke. How do you tell the difference between introverted Finnish person and extroverted Finnish person? The introverted Finnish person is looking at their own feet when they're meeting you. The extroverted Finnish person is looking at your feet when they're meeting you. So happy 13 years in the US to me. I think we're gonna go to Texas Roadhouse today.
So this is kind of interesting because in a lot of videos that I've reacted to of Americans in Europe, oftentimes they comment on how Europeans don't have as much regard for personal space. That doesn't seem to be the case in Finland. And maybe the Scandinavian countries in general just have more open space and people really value that open space a lot more. But that does seem to be a lot different than the Netherlands and France and the UK, other European countries where, again, Americans have pointed out that people really don't see personal space the same way. So if you're a European from a country outside of the Scandinavian countries and you've been to the Scandinavian countries, let me know if you noticed a difference between your country and the country that you went to as far as personal space, or vice versa. If you're from a Scandinavian country and you've been to Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, etc., let me know if you noticed a difference in how they view personal space compared to your home country. On to the next video, and this one is muted because annoying copyrighted music. When you go for a little walk in America as a European, this pretty much sums it up. This pretty much sums it up right here. And honestly, these sidewalks, I mean, it's better than nothing, but these sidewalks do kind of piss me off because I feel like, wouldn't it be better to have the sidewalk over here and then have the grass here so you have a little more protection? I don't know. I never really felt very comfortable with sidewalks like this because you can see this road here is very wide and cars tend to speed on these kinds of roads. So it only takes one little mishap to occur to just wipe this person on the sidewalk off the face of this planet. This is kind of crazy. You should never, she is definitely jaywalking here. Jaywalking is not necessarily just bad because you can get a ticket for it. It's bad because the road design in the US is not compatible with it at all. Now, I will say, walking as a pedestrian in certain parts of Thailand and Vietnam can be a lot more chaotic than what I'm accustomed to in the US. But at the very least, in these places, you're not the only one walking. You'll never be the only person walking. Whereas, I mean, how many pedestrians have we seen throughout this video? Let's go ahead and bring it back to the beginning. Count how many other pedestrians you see in this video. I mean, it's literally just empty. It's just completely empty, and you can tell she is not having a very good time at all. At all. And I don't know why she decided to cross right here, but yeah, walking in the US is just not a pleasant experience. And another thing you'll probably notice is that what is surrounding her throughout this walk? What buildings are there? It's just a whole bunch of nothing. On to the next video.
What's up, man? You alright? What you mean I'm alright? Yeah, I'm alright. Why you ask?
Okay, so this is what I mean. I've mentioned this in the past, not necessarily for phrases like this, but even with something as simple as staring. I've noticed as I've traveled more and more that in some cultures, staring is socially acceptable. In the US, you should not do that, especially, and I've kind of alluded to it in the past, but I'm just going to explicitly state it right now. If you are in an area that is predominantly African American, do not stare at people. Do not stare at people. Just don't do it. People watching, all that, they might stare at you. Do not stare back, because oftentimes that will be perceived in a very hostile manner. Now, we saw he asked, what was it?
All right. Yeah, I'm all right.
He asked, are you all right? And you can see he got defensive. Obviously, it's a skit, but this is very, very real. This is rooted in reality. In certain places in the US, you can't say certain things. So let's say, for example, if you are in LA in a predominantly black community and you ask someone where they're from, that is liable to get you jumped. Okay, just don't do it. Don't ask why that's the case. I'm not going to get too deep into that right now. That's a whole different discussion for a whole different day. But you have to be very mindful, because what you need to understand, and I'm a black man saying this, I'm half black, but I'm a black man saying this. Black people in the US very rarely travel overseas. It's very unfortunate, but very few black people in the US have the resources or really the desire to go overseas and see other cultures. So they only really know what they've been exposed to, just like the rest of the US, but to an even greater extent. Because we know statistically that African Americans are the lowest earning demographic in the US. So it's something that you need to keep in mind, is that black people in the US may seem like they're not as open to other cultures, but it's more so that they just haven't really been exposed to other cultures. And again, it's very unfortunate, but oftentimes black people are some of the most jovial people you'll ever meet. It's just that you have to kind of get past that initial cultural divide, which will be much more prominent than, let's say, your average American who descends from Irish people or German people or whatever. Because even though they're Americans and they've never been to Germany, they've never been to Ireland, they at least have somewhat of a sense of where they come from an ancestral perspective. Most black people in the US don't know where we come from. I don't know where the black side of my family comes from, because we came over involuntarily as slaves. Again, I'm going a lot deeper into this than I would have anticipated for a skit like this, but it's just important to understand this dynamic, that black people tend to identify with black culture. And black culture, because very few black people are going overseas, tends to be very, very insular.
Why you ask? I was just saying hello. Do you know what the toilet is? Where's the what? The toilet. The
What?
The
Where
place
you
you go
from?
to pee.
Where you from?
Yeah, I'm from England.
England? Where's that? That Paris?
No.
Hey, Jerome!
Yo, what's
This guy
good?
from England.
You from where?
Ha! Ain't that Paris?
Say that again. Say that again. Say that again. Say Harry Potter.
So this is another thing. So again, like I mentioned before, African American people, you'll hear me refer to black people and African American people interchangeably. When I say black people, that's what I'm referring to, African Americans. African American people tend to be some of the most jovial people and lighthearted people that you'll come across in the US. But you have to understand how they communicate, because in the black community, it's a lot more accepted to make fun of people, and we call it roasting, or different regions have different terms for it, but roasting is a pretty commonly used one. It's never with ill intent, especially if it's accompanied by laughter. It's almost never intended to actually create psychological distress. It's almost always to, in a sense, initiate you into the group, if that makes sense. It might not make sense depending on what culture you come from, but it's never meant to be taken personally or literally. Now, on the off chance that it is, generally that can lead to very, very big issues. But in a situation like this, they're basically saying, you're cool. You're cool with us. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily in their group or you're in their clique or whatever, but you're cool. And when they see you, they're probably going to keep making jokes, but that's just how it is. So that's probably something I haven't spoken enough about in my videos, is that there's a pretty big distinction and cultural chasm between American culture and African American culture. And as an African American who has a pretty good range of experience across multiple demographic groups, because I grew up in a diverse area, I do consider myself qualified to speak on this. So I will try to speak more on this in my future videos.